Okay, today's message is called Threshing Floor, and it's taken from Matthew chapter 3, verses 12. A very important message in this time. It's really important, especially where believers are concerned, that you're concentrating on God's plan and purpose for your life, not getting too wrapped up in what I'd call the fear that is surrounding the world, especially to do with the coronavirus. So please take heed to what you hear. Message, Threshing Floor, taken from Matthew chapter 3, verses 12. And it reads, his winnowing fan, shovel or fork, I'm reading from the Amplified Bible, is in his hand, and he, referring to Christ, will thoroughly clear out and clean his threshing floor and gather and store his wheat in his barn, but the chaff he will burn up with fire that cannot be put out. Let me read it one more time. His winnowing fan, shovel or fork, is in his hand, and he, Christ, will thoroughly clear out and clean his threshing floor. It's really important that you realize that it's his winnowing fan. I'm going to explain all of this. Let me go to where it says his threshing floor and gather. Let me go back to, where should I start from there? Let me start where it says, and thoroughly clear out and clean his threshing floor and gather and store his wheat in his barn, but the chaff he will burn up with fire that cannot be put out. This is a passage taken from John the Baptist that was explaining Jesus Christ and what he will do, refer to the ministry of Christ and the separation that it brings from the gospel, the transformation and the changes that it brings. But it's an interesting, he uses the term referring to winnowing fan, and he's connecting it to the threshing floor. Now let me explain. A threshing floor refers to it's a huge space, usually back in biblical days, and it would be a flat surface. And it would be used at the time of the harvest. At the time of the harvest, as an example, you gathered in, say, the barley wheat. You would bring the wheat and you'd put it on the threshing floor. When you put it on the threshing floor, the next stage was what is classed as the crushing stage or the beating stage. And that would be where you now have to beat the grain or beat the wheat with the purpose of separating the grain from the chaff. The chaff refers to the covering, which needs to be removed. And what would happen is, if you had an ox in those days, you would get an ox and you would have the ox trample the harvest. And by doing so, it was causing a separation between hence the wheat, the grain and the chaff. Or you could take a stick, which is a harder process, and you could beat the brother. Yeah, but that's a long process of doing it. Now, after that process of beating the harvest, the wheat, there comes what's called the second stage, which is called what I call the finalizing stage, which is the winnowing stage. And that is where you'd have a winnowing fan, which is a fork-like thing, and you'd use that and you'd push it into the harvest and you'd throw it up into the air, and the wind plays a part of blowing what they call the chaff away. And at the end, eventually, it helps in finalizing the separation of the grain and the chaff. The chaff is what is not good. The grain is what is good, makes bread, and so on. And eventually you would have a separation, and you would have the good referring to the grain, and on the bad referring to the chaff and anything else that was there as well. And that's a long process, but after you've done it, you've got what you need, or you should say you've got what is good. Now, it's interesting where Christ is concerned, he makes a point that he has his own winnowing fan, and it also refers to he has his own threshing floor. His threshing floor refers to this, represents his kingdom, represents his principles, his way, and his threshing floor is where he makes a distinction between what is of him and what is not of him. And he's in charge of it. And he will gather into his own barn, or into his own relationship to himself, what is of him, and he will separate what is not of him. This time that we're in right now is also what's classed as a threshing floor moment, where there will be a distinction. I guarantee you, I'm now speaking prophetically, as it's that prophetic anointing is on me, whereby September there will be such a divide and a distinction in many areas, especially where the church is concerned. I just want to stick to where the church is concerned. Now, I want to move on from there, and I want to look on 2 Samuel chapter 6, and I want to read verses 6, where it says, but when they arrived at the threshing floor of Nacon, the oxen stumbled, and Uzzah reached out his hand and steadied the ark of God. Then the Lord's anger was aroused against Uzzah, And God struck him dead because of this. So Uzzah died right there beside the ark of God. As I said, this is a threshing floor moment. Now, this story in 2 Samuel chapter 6 refers to the fact where David has now become king, and David was able to get the ark back from their enemies, the Philistines. He gets the ark back. He's bringing it to Jerusalem. This is a fantastic and an amazing time. However, when they got the ark back, they put it on a cart. It's classed as a new cart. Makes no difference, as I'm going to go on and explain. He puts the ark on a cart. And what happens is they're celebrating, making their way to Jerusalem. God is silent until they get to, hear this, the threshing floor of Nacon. And this is really important. Soon as they get to the threshing floor is the place where God makes a distinction. Soon as they get to the threshing floor, then suddenly the ox stumbles. This is all instigated by the Lord, because the threshing floor is where God will make a distinction. When they get to the threshing floor, the ox stumbles, and we have here Uzzah, who is a good man. He's a Levite. He touches it, and the purpose of it is to stabilize it, and God strikes him dead right there, and everybody's thinking, what just happened? And what this is about is where it doesn't matter how much they had good intentions. David's intentions were fantastic. He's got the ark back. He's put it on the cart. But what was wrong here? Let me tell you what went wrong here. First and foremost, where the ark was concerned, it was never meant to be carried in a cart. The ark was only allowed to be carried on the shoulders of the priest. So here we see where no matter what was their good intentions, it is not God's righteous intentions. Next, we see that when the ark stumbles, it looks good. He means well. A man named Uzzah, who's a Levite, because the ark was only meant to be carried on the shoulders of the priest, and within the, well, I'd say, carried by the tribe of the Levites. So he's a Levite, so he's not doing too bad. However, when he touches it, he dies. He has to die, because not any Levite could touch the ark. Only those that were classed as the priest of the Levite tribe could touch the ark. Not anybody could touch the ark. And in fact, we're talking like the high priest, like Aaron. And when he touches the ark, he dies. Now, here's what's interesting. The word Uzzah means strength. And in this moment here, what I call the threshing floor moment, our strength, God is going to make a distinction between what is our strength and what is his strength. There will be a distinction in this moment. I said the word September because I sense that in my spirit. My prophetic hat's on me, and we're going to see changes. And when we get to September, there will be so much changes by the time we get there. Our strength will not be able to do this anymore where Christianity is concerned. God will make a distinction between our strength, our capability, how we do things, and God's way. How interesting. God said nothing, done nothing until the ark got to the threshing floor, because the threshing floor is where God says now we'll make a distinction. And it's interesting. God even names whose threshing floor it was. It was the threshing floor of Nacon, Nacon, Nacon. Why do I need to know that? Because the threshing floor of Nacon, Nacon's name refers to trustworthy. All right, did you hear what I'm saying? Trustworthy. Because God will wait until you get to his threshing floor, where he will make a distinction between what is truly is, that's where the word trustworthy derives from, and what is truly not of his. And then David and everybody was upset. But what happened from there? The ark had to be put in another person's house, another Levite's house. And eventually they done it correctly, where the ark was brought to Jerusalem on the shoulders of the priest. So one of the things I want to make it clear that's going to happen in this threshing floor moment or season, however you want to say it, is that God is going to make a distinction between how he does things contrary to how we do things where the church is concerned, Christians are concerned, but especially where churches are concerned, you're going to feel the strain where you're not doing things God's way, because he's about to bring the church to the threshing floor of Nacon. Okay, trustworthy, where it will represent what is truly of God. Trustworthy derives from the word trust. Trust comes from the word truth. And God is going to truly make a point about this is how I do things, contrary to us. Okay, now let me move on from there. I want to move to Matthew chapter 13, verses 24. And this is taken from Matthew chapter 13, verse 24 down to 30, but I'm not going to read all of it. I just want to read verses 24, and I'm going to read verses 30. Verses 24, it says, another parable he put forth to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, unaware, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. Let me read that again. Another parable he put forth to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. Let me just read what it says in verse 30. Let both grow together until the harvest. And at the time of harvest, I will say to the reapers, first gather together the tares and bind them into bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. Matthew chapter 13 is verses 24 downwards, is literally talking about, as we heard, a man who sows good seed in his ground. However, at night, a deceiver comes and sows tares. Eventually what happens is that as the good stuff starts to grow, the bad stuff is discovered. And what happens is that his servant says, hold on a minute, what's going on here? You didn't sow tares, you sowed wheat. What's going on here? And the master makes it clear to them, okay, someone else has done this. This is deliberate to cause a destruction. Are you hearing me? And the plan of the enemy is to cause a destruction concerning our lives. But let's go on. The reapers say, you know what? Let's make a distinction. We're going to separate the tares from the wheat. But this wasn't the time of the harvest, because at the time of the harvest is at the time of the threshing floor. And what happened is they wanted to, because of what they could see, make a distinction. But just like with 2 Samuel chapter 6, nothing happens until the time of the threshing floor. And where they wanted to remove the tares, what they could see from the wheat, the master says, no, you don't. Because this ain't the time of the harvest. This ain't the time of the threshing floor. So leave it alone. And at the right time, when it comes for us to take up the harvest, then we can make a distinction. The same process of what they do on the threshing floor, like I've said before. So what's going on here? This now is where in this time, this is what God's also going to be doing concerning the term threshing floor. God is going to be dealing with our characters. Are you hearing me? There's some things to do with our life which God is saying when you get to the threshing floor. In other words, when you get to this stage here, this far, something will have to change concerning our lives. There are some things, and I sense this as I'm talking, there's some things about our lives which we are, I could say, a good way of saying it is we are allowed to continue with until we get to this threshing floor moment where God is saying, you can't do that no more. You can't live like that no more. There are things about our character where God is going to make a distinction. In fact, I want to go into the area of ministry. There's some things to do with ministry where God is saying, you can't do that no more. And he's going to make a distinction between leadership and ministries and so on. But in general, in Christendom, you will find that there is a character there's a character attack of the Lord where he's going to be dealing with us in certain areas where we can't be like this anymore, because the threshing floor is going to make a distinction, and it will be a huge challenge on our life, whether it's from the top all the way down to the bottom. Take heed to this, because God will be doing this in this threshing floor moment. Now let me go on from there. I want to give one more. I want to talk about Judges chapter 6, and this is about Gideon. Now, I want to read from verse 11, just a bit where it says, Gideon threshed wheat in the winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, the Lord is with you, mighty man of valor. Let me read it again. Gideon threshed wheat in the winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, the Lord is with you, mighty man of valor. You know what? I'm going to read it one more time. Gideon, what's he doing? Threshing wheat in the winepress, wrong place, in order to hide it from the Midianites. He's frightened. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, the Lord is with you, mighty man of valor. Now, this is at a time where Israel, due to their rebellion and how they lived their life, they ended up losing so many things, and their enemies ended up literally having charge over their life. Gideon is a person who doesn't know who he is. He's insecure. He's afraid. He has no clue of the dynamics of who he is, especially the word mighty man of valor. You can forget that. And what happens is we see at the time of the harvest, this is the harvest time, Gideon is threshing wheat in the wine press. The reason for that is because the wine press is a smaller area for what we call, and it's a place for crushing grapes. It's a smaller area for making a distinction than the actual place where you would, or should say the threshing floor to do with wheat and so on, is a much bigger place, huge place. And what it was he's hiding. What he's doing is good. He's threshing, he's threshing wheat in the wine press, but really and truly he's afraid. He's afraid that the Midianites are going to find out, they're going to take away the stuff and obviously do him some harm. Now what happens is, in the threshing floor moment, the Lord turns up and starts referring to him as a mighty man. Now stay with me, this is quite deep. Gideon doesn't know who he is, but he's threshing wheat in the wine press. The threshing floor is the place of distinction and separation. So in this threshing floor moment, God now turns up to make a distinction which is far greater than his own distinction. In his threshing floor moment, where he's got wheat, he is gathering a small portion to represent his life. But God is going to do what he did with Gideon, with many of us, where he wants to make it clear exactly who we are in this threshing floor moment, where our view of ourselves is totally wrong or separated from how God sees us. And in this moment, God is going to be making a distinction. Actually, this is who you are, contrary to how you see yourself. So when God refers to him as a mighty man of valor, God is making it clear to him that his view of himself is totally far away from how God sees him. And it was a very hard thing for Gideon to take it on board. But eventually he does accept it, because in that moment, God wanted him to know that he was far more greater than he saw himself. Be prepared. In this threshing floor moment, you're going to be surprised. 3 things will take place. Number 1, God is going to be making a distinction between how he does things and what is not of him. Secondly, God's going to be dealing with our character on the threshing floor, where he's going to be making a distinction where, hold on a minute, you can't be like this anymore. And we're going to feel the sense of that strongly by the Holy Spirit, because it's a change on the inside, especially where character is concerned. And thirdly, the threshing floor is going to make a distinction between our purpose, ministry, what we're called to do. And we may have a view of it, but it's smaller than God's view. Notice Gideon's threshing wheat. He's only got a small portion of wheat. He should have a greater portion of wheat if he really had confidence in who he was. And God is going to make a distinction so that we know who we are according to the clarity and the mindset of how God sees us. He knows the thoughts that he thinks towards us. And it's about time that some of us realize that God's going to make that distinction. And it's going to be in this moment, the threshing floor. Be blessed.